All right, let's start with the tissues. The tissues are types of fabric that make us up. All tissues, the different types, are made of similarly differentiated cells, meaning cells that do similar things, as well as intercellular substances. And intercellular substances are substances in between the cells. Inter means in between. The other word that we often use that way is intracellular, and that is referring to substances that are inside the cell. But intercellular means in between the cells. We have four basic types. We have a muscular-ish tissue type, a nervous tissue type, epithelial tissue, as well as connective tissue. If we look at that here, we have some examples of how they look. Four tissue types: connective, muscle, epithelial, and nervous. And down here we have different types of muscle tissue. We have three types of muscle tissue, which we'll get through. Muscle tissue, their cells are designed to contract and to relax. That's it. Cells contract and relax. If we see that here, we know that of muscles, they contract. When we contract the biceps, the arm moves upwards. That's a contraction, so we can move some bones. We look at different types of muscle. The main one we talk about is the skeletal muscle. But we also have a heart. Well, thank the Lord we have a heart. And that muscle type in the heart is considered a cardiac muscle. And then whatever lines, tubes, or things that need contraction that are in our viscera, in our gut, or our lungs, for example, or the blood vessels, that's composed of smooth muscle tissue. When we look at nervous tissues, we have cells, nerve cells that sense, conduct, and store information. We can see that here we have a situation where the cells has long extensions here from a place of receiving something, an information, and then it sends it to another place via electricity that then will do something with that information, like store it or make a decision. If you can see here, this is the center of making a decision, and then down here, this neuron, it sends an impulse out again into a place where we have a reaction. We've seen this sort of loop in the negative feedback loop. That was one place where that already got shown, where we have an input from a receiving end. We have an afferent bringing information into the central part of the body, mostly the brain, and then there will be a processing, a decision making, and the information will be sent out to a effector organ or something that can make a change, such as help us change the environment, the temperature on the inside, or contract the muscle, depending on what we need to do. And so the nervous system is helping with that. So it senses, it conducts. So it senses, conducts, stores information, and of course it talks to other cells also then down here at the end of the cycle, where they have an effect that they can create. Connective tissue, down here, is the most diverse one. We have many, many different types. We have blood is connective tissue, fat is connective tissue, that's adipose, and bones also part of connective tissue. What they have in common, they connect things to one another. So here are different types. This dense connective tissue is a tendon or something like that, or something around the muscle that holds the muscle together. Adipose is fat, we know that. Loose connective tissue is another type that is more like a packaging, a loose packaging that doesn't need to exude strength onto it as much. And then we have the bone, which is also connective tissue, the hardest substance in the body. Well, enamel is, but it's part of the bone structure there. And we also have blood, which is a liquid connective tissue. So a lot of variety in that type. And then the last one we're going to start with in more detail is epithelial tissue. And epithelial tissue is the coverings of the body, like the skin, for example, linings, which are like the inside layer of a blood vessel, for example. Glands are also epithelial tissue, and then some sensory receptors, like the eyes and the nose, have receptors. Those are also composed of epithelial tissue. So we have a bit of a spectrum right here. This here is a skin example. This here is the inside of a blood vessel. That's the inside layer is epithelial. Then this here is the inside layer of the gut, the digestive tube. We said before in class that that's almost the outside of your body. So that is also epithelial tissue. And then, well, this example is a gland that feeds into a hair on the skin and gives us the oily secretions. That's our regular good old lotion gland that makes our own lotion. And then this is an example of an eye that has receptors that derive from the epithelial tissues in the back that transform light into electricity that can be transmitted to the brain so we can see a picture. And this here looks like it's a nose that gets us the smelly stuff, the olfaction. So let's go into detail a little bit more on the epithelial tissue. When we look at functions of this tissue type, surface epithelial covers us and provides protection. Think about the skin. You're bumping into something. Guess what? You're not opening the skin. It's protecting the underlying tissue. And skin is epithelial. A lot of skin is epithelial. Then we also have the gut lining. That's epithelial, and that has a lot to do with absorbing nutrients. So that's a function, absorption. And then when we look at glands, glands secrete, like sweat or sebum, which is the oily secretion that we just saw, to the outside. And then also we have secretions that come through hormones, like insulin. We talked about that regulates blood sugar. And that is secreted into the bloodstream. And then lastly, as function, we have the sensation. The retinal cells in the eye transmit sensory impressions to the brain. Or what they do is they change it into electricity, and then that's sent to the brain for sensory impressions. So epithelial tissue connects us to the environment around us. That's good to know. What are some of the characteristics of the epithelial tissue? Well, we have a few of them. We have cellularity. That means there is a lot of cells that are packed very closely together. So this tissue type doesn't really have an intercellular secretion. When we look at some slides here, all these little dots, the darker stuff, that's nuclei of cells. You can see they're right next to one another, all the way here, all around here. We can see a schematic that's a gut cell, or in the small intestine. There is not much room in here for liquid and stuff in between. Actually, we don't want there to be any because we need to protect this part, which is the inside of the gut tube, from this part. And we need to make sure not other stuff than what we want gets into that, capillary and blood supply. That is cellularity. Epithelial tissue has a basement membrane. So that means it always attaches to a connective tissue that's underneath it. Okay? The basement membrane is right here. There is a membrane area. Look at see, it says here basement membrane. There is a region in the epithelial cells that then connects with the underlying connective tissue. And that area, that connection between the two of them, we call that collectively the basement membrane. This attachment makes the bottom and the top surface different from one another. One is free on top, and the other one is attached to the bottom, the basement membrane. So the topical surface is called the apical surface, and the other one is called the basement membrane. So this is the apical region of this cell right here. And then last but not last, it's two more to go. Epithelial tissue has no blood supply. It is considered to be avascular. So it has to get nutrients from somewhere, and it gets that through diffusion from the underneath tissue types. So this piece here, epithelial, is not vascularized, no blood. Underneath what the connective tissue is doing there's a lot of blood supplied here. So the nutrients go above and they diffuse into these cells on top. Interesting. I find it interesting. And then lastly here, the epithelial cells are very regenerative. That means if they're well nourished, they will regenerate easily. They make new cells. You think of the skin, you think of you brushing your skin, a lot of cells fall off. We have to make new ones from underneath that we do not start bleeding, essentially, and cut through that layer. Alright, let's do the rest in the next movie. Hope you're learning something.